Hey y'all, I'm Carrie,
I'm Mama.
and this is Monstrous. This episode contains language and topics that may not be suitable for all listeners, and topics that may be triggering to some. Listener discretion is advised. All right, we're back for another week. We're back off of our 2 episode week last week. So this episode, everyone is going to hate. We're going to go even lower than we have over the last few weeks, and this one's going to be much sadder. This case is awful, and it's gonna be hard for me to tell it and even harder for you to hear it. But these victims must be remembered and their story must be told. And hopefully, if you or someone you know is going through something similar, then there is something within the episode that you can take and use to be able to get out safely. So, as always, we appreciate you joining us to explore these different cases. By doing what we do, it keeps these cases and the victims' names alive, as well as their memories, while giving each of us tools to keep ourselves and our loved ones safe. Today, I bring you a case that shook a community. It tore not one, but two families apart, and it exposed the dark edges of human behavior. As of last year, this case has officially come to a close, and justice has finally been served. And yesterday marked 4 years since these two entire families were changed forever. So now we are going to take a deep dive into what happened, examining how trust was betrayed, lives were stolen, and violence escalated with devastating speed. It's a story that began with hope and ended in unimaginable loss. 2 days. That's how long Kennedy Hoyle was alive. 2 days between her first breath and the moment she was taken from this world. 2 days between being placed in her mother's arms and being thrown into darkness. Danielle Hoyle should have been home, learning how to sleep in short bursts, memorizing the sound of her daughter's cry, and wondering if she was doing everything right. She should have been exhausted, overwhelmed, and hopeful all at once. Instead, Danielle never made it back. This is a story about trust, about control, and about how quickly violence can escalate, especially when a woman is at her most vulnerable. The following episode contains detailed descriptions of extreme domestic violence, the murder of a young mother, and the tragic death of a 2-day-old infant. The forensic details regarding the disposal of the victims and the subsequent police interrogations are graphic. This content may be deeply distressing, particularly for parents or those who have experienced domestic trauma. Okay. If you or someone you know is currently in an unsafe relationship or is experiencing domestic abuse, please do not wait. Help is available 24/7. You can call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 800-799-7233 or simply text the word START to 88788. Your safety matters and you are not alone.
I wish more people would realize that.
Yeah, but that's kind of what the abuser does. They kind of make you feel like,
I know.
you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Now, if we all want to take a collective sigh, center ourselves, and get as ready as we can, we're going to get into the case for this week. The night was bitingly cold. In the Whitehaven neighborhood of Memphis, the streets are usually lined with the quiet sounds of families settling in for the evening. But at the intersection of Levi Road and Sedgwick Street, the silence was broken by the strobing blue and red lights of police cruisers. Officers had been called to investigate a suspicious vehicle, a white Chevrolet Cruze sitting abandoned, its driver's side window shattered into 1,000 glittering diamonds on the asphalt. Inside the car, there was no driver. There was only a quiet, chilling void where a family should have been. As investigators began to fan out into the dark, wooded surround wooded area surrounding the car. They weren't just looking for a motorist who had experienced a breakdown. They were looking for a 27-year-old mother and a baby who had been on this earth for less than 48 hours. The discovery that followed would spark a frantic citywide Amber Alert. But to understand the tragedy of that night, we have to go back. We have to look at the light of Danielle Hoyle, the woman she was, the mother she strove to be, and the man who decided that her life and the life of her child was a debt he was unwilling to pay. To understand the tragedy that unfolded on that freezing February night, we have to look at the people involved, not as headlines or court records, but as they were in the quiet moments of their daily lives. Danielle Hoyle was the heartbeat of her family. At 27 years old, she was a woman defined by her grit and her grace. She grew up in Whitehaven, a storied neighborhood in South Memphis that is fiercely proud and deeply rooted. In Memphis, Whitehaven is known for its village atmosphere. It's a place where neighbors know your name and your grandmother's name. Danielle was a product of that village. She was a daughter who checked in on her mother, April Campbell, every single day. And she was the anchor for her 10-year-old daughter, Uriah. For Danielle, life was about the grind and the reward. She worked at FedEx, the giant of the Memphis economy. To work at the hub, as they called it in Memphis, is to be part of a high pressure, fast paced environment that demands physical endurance and discipline. It often involves late night shifts and grueling labor in the heavy humidity of the South. But Danielle didn't complain. Every paycheck was a brick in the wall of security she was building for Jariah. Friends described her as a girl mom in the truest sense. She and Jariah were a team, a duo that shared everything from secrets to dreams of what came next. When Danielle found out she was pregnant again, she didn't see a burden. She saw another teammate. She saw a sister for Jariah and another reason to keep building,
That's a pretty name, Jariah.
isn't it?
That's
It,
real pretty.
it took me a little bit to figure out exactly how to pronounce it just because the way it's spelled, but I got there. She was Danielle was the type of mother who already had the nursery planned and the baby's future mapped out before the first trimester was over. We see her heart in the preparations she made. Danielle didn't just pick a name. She weighed them carefully, looking for something that felt both strong and bright, eventually settling on Kennedy. Her nesting wasn't just a biological instinct. It was an act of devotion. She had carefully selected the tiny outfits, the softest blankets, and the pink accented car seat that would later become a haunting piece of evidence. She had organized the diapers and mapped out the transition for Jariah to become a big sister. Every small purchase, the bottles, the pacifiers, the onesies, was a physical manifestation of her promise to protect and provide for this new life. But while Daniel was building a future, the man she let into her life, Brandon Isabelle, was carefully maintaining a past that he had no intention of letting go. Brandon Isabelle was 25 years old at the time, and to Danielle, he likely seemed like a man trying to find his footing, a young man with his own life and ambitions. But Brandon was a master of the double life. He wasn't just dating Danielle, he was a man partitioned into two different worlds, and they were never meant to touch. In one world, he was the boyfriend of a hard working woman in Whitehaven. In the other, he was a married man.
Oh,
He was navigating a marriage with another woman, managing a household and a history that Danielle was kept largely in the dark about. How does someone maintain that for an entire year? Well, it requires a specific kind of calculated deception, a constant monitoring of phone calls, a careful curation of stories, and an emotional detachment that should have been a warning sign. He had to be a chameleon, shifting his personality, his tone, and his very history depending on which zip code he was standing in. He managed these parallel lives with a chilling efficiency, hiding his wedding ring in the glove box right up until the moment a biological reality made it impossible to hide anymore. And we have to consider the psychological toll on the other side of the web as well, the hidden wife that Daniel had. So while we focus on the tragedy of Danielle and Kennedy, there was another woman in Brandon's life who was also being deeply betrayed. Brandon wasn't just lying to Danielle, he was betraying every woman that he had ever claimed to love. The energy required to maintain such a massive lie is staggering, and it speaks to a fundamental lack of empathy. He viewed these women not as partners, but as characters in a play that he was directing, treating their emotions and their trust as disposable tools for his own convenience. When Danielle became pregnant with Kennedy, Brandon's two worlds began to collide, and the pressure was immense. This wasn't a relationship marked by typical new baby excitement. There was no happy announcements or shared shopping trips for baby clothes. Instead, it was defined by a quiet, escalating war of wills. According to evidence that would later come out in trial, Brandon was not just unsupportive. He was actively hostile toward the idea of Kennedy's existence. He repeatedly pressured Danielle to terminate the pregnancy. And this wasn't just a one-time conversation. It was a persistent psychological campaign that lasted for months. He urged her to get an abortion, framing it not as a choice, but as a necessity for his life to remain stable.
Because he wanted his cake and eat it too.
Yep. Because he knew that his wife would find out.
Yep.
Kind of hard to hide a baby. Brandon saw Kennedy not as a daughter, but as a financial anchor, a lifelong link to Danielle that would eventually force his double life into the light of day. This is where the child support factor comes in. In Tennessee, child support laws are strict and rigorously enforced.
Yeah, they are.
For a man like Brandon, an 18-year financial obligation wasn't just a bill. To him and men like him, it's a death sentence for the lifestyle that he had curated. He saw his disposable income and his unencumbered freedom disappearing. And in his narcissistic worldview, the financial cost of a child was a debt that he refused to pay. He viewed the impending birth as a social and financial termination of the life that he preferred to lead. There was a documented pattern of control here as well. While there wasn't necessarily physical domestic violence calls to the police, the red flags of emotional and psychological abuse were everywhere. This is what experts call coercive control. It's the subtle isolation, the making a partner feel like their choices aren't their own, and the constant gaslighting. We also have to look at the predatory grooming Brandon used to keep Danielle in the relationship. Now, grooming isn't always about age. That's where you hear it the most. A grown adult grooming a child. But an adult can groom another adult as well because it's about the gradual breakdown of boundaries, not just about age. Brandon likely used what is referred to as love bombing in the very beginning, where he showered Danielle with affection and attention to create a sense of intense security. This makes it that much harder to leave when the mask begins to slip. By the time the pregnancy occurred, he had already established a cycle where Danielle likely felt responsible for his stress or unhappiness. He manipulated her desire for a stable family to keep her anchored to a man who was already planning her exit. And then there's the silence of the victim. It is a heartbreaking but common trait in domestic abuse cases. Danielle most likely kept the worst of Brandon's pressure, so the demands for the abortion, how cold he was, and the threats, a secret from her family. And some of you may be asking why Danielle or anyone in her situation would do something like this. And most do it for the same reasons that Danielle probably did. She wanted to protect her family from worrying. She wanted to believe the best of the man that she had chosen, and she didn't want to tarnish the image of the father of her child. This silence is a predator's greatest ally. It allows the abuse to grow in the dark and away from the eyes of those who would have stepped in to save her. Danielle's mother, April, had felt that tension, though. Mothers have that sixth sense, that internal alarm that sounds when someone isn't who they claim to be. She could tell that something wasn't right with Brandon. She saw the way Danielle tried to make it work, the way she hoped Brandon would step up once the baby arrived, and she saw Danielle's optimism, that classic heartbreaking hope that the sight of a newborn baby would change a man's heart. And she saw how it clashed with Brandon's cold, calculated reality. But Brandon wasn't preparing for fatherhood as Danielle hoped he was. He wasn't buying diapers, he wasn't researching car seats, and he wasn't putting together a crib. While Danielle was nesting and preparing, Brandon was reportedly researching. He was looking for a way out that didn't involve child support or divorce. Investigators would later look into his background to see if there were any cracks before this, any prior arrests, or prior patterns of violence. While he didn't have a massive violent felony record, the record of his character was written in the lies that he told every day. He was a man who could look two different women in the eye and promise them a future while knowing one of those futures was a complete fabrication. By the time Danielle's third trimester arrived, their relationship was a powder keg. For Danielle, every kick from Kennedy was a promise of a new beginning, a reason to endure the struggle. For Brandon, it was a countdown to the destruction of the facade that he had built. He was a man who felt trapped by his own lies, and as we would later learn, a man who feels trapped by his own deception is often the most dangerous person in the room. He was facing the reality of child support, the exposure of his marriage, the exposure of his deceit to his wife, the end of his marriage, and the end of his uncumbered freedom. In his mind, he wasn't just a father. He was a man being hunted by responsibility. And in the dark corners of his mind, he began to believe that the only way to save his life was to end theirs. This wasn't just a heat of the moment situation. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was the result of a year of lies coming home to roost. Brandon Isabelle didn't just snap. He looked at the life he had built on deceptions and decided that murder was a more acceptable outcome than the truth. On January 30th, 2022, the world inside a Memphis hospital room was warm, quiet, and filled with the kind of hope that only a newborn can bring. This was the day Kennedy Hoyle entered the world. For Danielle, this was the culmination of months of nesting, of secret prayers, and of enduring the cold psychological warfare from Brandon. When she looked at Kennedy, she didn't see a burden or a complication. She saw a daughter. She saw the little girl she had named months ago, finally here in the flesh. She saw the 6 pound, 9 ounces of life that made every struggle of the last 9 months worth it. So we have to understand the physical state that Danielle was in. For anyone that does not know, labor is an athletic feat. It leaves a woman depleted, sore, and in a state of hyper awareness. Yet in every photo from those 2 days, Danielle is glowing.
Because her was the new mama.
Mhm. She was operating on that new mother high, a surge of oxytocin designed to bond mother to child. But in this case, it also served to mask the real danger that was circling her. She was healing, her body still recovering from the massive physical toll of childbirth. Yet her focus was entirely outward, on the tiny breathing miracle in the bassinet next to her bed. She was also navigating the postpartum administrative whirlwind. In those 48 hours, she was filling out birth certificate paperwork, officially linking Brandon Isabelle to this child in the eyes of the state of Tennessee. For Danielle, this was a proud moment of legitimacy. For Brandon, though, who was likely receiving texts or updates about the milestones, each form completed was a nail in the coffin of his secret life. But we have to look at the hospital discharge process through a darker lens to understand the vulnerability gap that opened up that day. Modern maternity wards are designed like fortresses.
Yeah, they are.
There are electronic bracelets on the infants, which are often called hug tags. These trigger an immediate lockdown of the unit if they get too close to an elevator or an exit while wearing those bracelets. There are multiple ID checks, matching bands to mothers and fathers, and heavy security doors that require badge access. Some hospitals, the parents have they're just like the hug tags on infants,
Mhm.
but there's like a scanner inside the bracelet.
Oh,
And if
they
you
I know they've come a long way with some of
and if
this.
you don't have that bracelet and you can't scan the door, it won't even open to get into the maternity ward.
Nice.
Yep, things have definitely changed.
Yeah, since we had our especially since I had mine.
Right, and even just since Logan was born. Things I mean, they had bracelets, they did all the checks and things like that, but when Logan was born, I don't think they had those electronic bracelets yet.
Because I walked right into the
Mhm.
maternity ward.
Yep, now they did have, something like the hug tag they have today for Logan, but it wasn't as advanced. A lot of the hugs that some hospitals now have, like, GPS locations inside their hug tag.
Nice.
So, as long as it's not cut off, they're able to track where the child went. Not all have those, obviously, just the ones that can afford it, because those things are not cheap. Anyway, so inside those walls, Danielle and Kennedy were safe. They were surrounded by medical professionals and a system designed to protect new life at all costs. This environment created a psychological bubble of security where the outside world felt so far away. There's a tragic bureaucratic irony in the car seat safety check here as well. Before Danielle could even leave the hospital, a staff member, most likely, because this is normal now, had to have performed a mandatory inspection. They would have walked out to Danielle's white Chevy Cruze, ensuring the base was locked, the straps were at a correct height, and that Kennedy was perfectly secured. This is the system working exactly as intended. Nurses and technicians meticulously ensuring that a 2-day-old infant is protected from the what ifs of the road. It is a haunting image, a professional confirming the safety of the very car seat that would be found empty and discarded just hours later. The system was looking for a car accident. That's what it was designed for. It wasn't designed to look for a predator once they left. However, there's a specific terrifying vulnerability that occurs the moment a new mother is cleared for discharge. You go from a highly monitored, secure environment to the sidewalk in a matter of minutes. For Danielle, being discharged just hours before she was killed meant that she was stepping out of that fortress and into a world where she was physically exhausted, emotionally overwhelmed, and entirely unprotected. So the scene, a nurse wheels Danielle out in a wheelchair, a standard hospital policy, even for the strongest of mothers. Kennedy is strapped in that pink accented car seat for the very first time.
Aw.
And there's a sense of you're on your own now that every new parent feels. But for Danielle, that feeling was literal. This highlights the predatory nature of what was happening. While Danielle was focused on the logistics of a car seat and a diaper bag, making sure Kennedy was buckled in correctly and the base was secure, Brandon was reportedly watching the clock. He wasn't waiting at home with balloons or a prepared nursery. He was waiting for her to be out and in the open. He knew the hospital was a no go zone for his plans. So he waited for the exact moment Danielle stepped off the hospital grounds, the moment that she became a soft target to put his plan into motion. He was hunting in a gap between professional insecurity and domestic reality. Now, I want us to lean into the witness testimony of Campbell, who's Danielle's mother, for a minute. This was one of the most gut wrenching moments of the entire trial. It provides the emotional marrow of this story. During the trial, April took the stand and described the 1 hour she had with Kennedy. So think about that for a second. An entire lifetime of grandmotherhood, graduations, birthdays, weddings, all condensed into 60 minutes.
I don't know what I'd do if I didn't have the grandkids to keep me going, so to speak.
I mean, of course, she has another granddaughter because
But there's
Danielle
just something
had,
about a new baby that just brings life into everybody.
right. I mean, she had Jariah, but it's with each child, it's different.
Right.
It's a whole new experience. You know what I'm saying? April went on to describe the sensory details that only a grandmother would notice. She talked about the weight of the baby in her arms, the specific new baby smell, and the way Kennedy's tiny fingers curled around hers. She spoke about Kennedy's hair, her tiny features, and the way she seemed to recognize the voices of the women who already loved her so much. April testified that she held that baby, kissed her, and told her how much she was loved, never dreaming that those would be the only physical memories she would ever have. The testimony revealed that even in that hour, the outside world was intruding. Danielle was checking her phone, coordinating with Brandon. She wanted him to see what April saw. These are the digital echoes of these final moments. The texts and photos Danielle most likely sent Brandon. She was sharing the miracle. She was sending him reminders of the life they had made, perhaps hoping that a photo of Kennedy's face would finally dissolve his hostility. And we have to sit with the chill of that realization that while Danielle was sending images of a sleeping newborn, Brandon was looking at those same images while allegedly preparing the logistics of their final meeting. She shared the last photos taken of them. Danielle looked tired but absolutely radiant, holding Kennedy close. In April's testimony, you could hear the agony of a woman who was looking at a beginning, unaware, unaware that she was actually looking at an end. She described Danielle's joy during those 48 hours as limitless. Danielle was already talking about Jariah meeting the baby, about how the two sisters would grow up together in Whitehaven. Danielle wasn't just happy, she was relieved. She thought the hard part, the pregnancy and the tension, was over. She truly believed that the arrival of this beautiful, innocent life would be the catalyst for Brandon to finally drop the act and be the man she needed. Now, we also have to consider Jariah's perspective. At 10 years old, Jariah wasn't just a bystander. She was the big sister who had been waiting nearly a year for this moment. While April was at the hospital, Jariah was at home, most likely preparing for the homecoming. She had been picking out toys, making space in her room, and imagining a life where she wasn't an only child anymore. Brandon wasn't just erasing a newborn. He was shattering the world of a 10-year-old girl who was expecting her mother and her new best friend to walk through the door at any moment.
My heart's breaking.
I know this is a hard one. It took me a couple days just to get get it all wrote out. Yeah. But as the sun began to set on February 1st, which I'm gonna tell you now, was Brandon's 25th birthday, the atmosphere shifted from celebration to something more sinister. The conflict during this 48-hour window was a silent, escalating tension. While the Hoyle family was celebrating, Brandon was facing a reality he could no longer lie his way out of. Kennedy wasn't an abstract problem anymore. She was a person with a birth certificate and a social security number. The birthday motive here is chilling. For a narcissist like Brandon, his birthday was supposed to be about him. It was supposed to be a day of celebration for his 25 years of life. Instead, he was being overshadowed by the arrival of a child he never wanted. In Kennedy, he didn't see a daughter. He saw an 18-year lien on his paycheck. He saw the end of his free life with his wife and other girlfriends. Every hour that Kennedy breathed was an hour closer to his wife finding out, to the court system stepping in, and to his facade crumbling. In his twisted logic, he was resetting his life on his own birthday. He viewed the crime not as a tragedy, but as a gift of freedom he was giving back to himself. The weather on that night only added to the isolation. On this night, Memphis was under an ice storm warning. The air was biting and the streets were beginning to slick over. Most people were hunkering down, but Danielle was heading out. She likely felt a sense of urgency. She wanted this new chapter to start on a positive note before the weather locked them in. She believed in the birthday magic, that maybe seeing his daughter on his own birthday would finally flip the switch in Brandon's heart. There were reports that they were supposed to meet so he could provide help, which added a layer of practical necessity to her drive. Danielle put Kennedy into that car seat. She packed the diaper bag with the precision of a woman who had been waiting for this moment for 9 months, and she drove toward Levi Road. She was moving towards a man she thought was a father, unaware that she was driving directly into a trap set by a man who had spent his birthday not celebrating life, but calculating how to end hers. She was driving with the windows up, the heater on, and a newborn sleeping in the back, moving through the familiar streets of Memphis towards a darkness she never saw coming. She was navigating the city she loved, carrying the daughter she had fought for, heading toward the man who had already decided they didn't fit into his future. She was exhausted, healing, and full of a mother's hope. Three things that made her the perfect victim for a man who had already moved on to his next life. By the evening of February 1st, 2022, the village of Whitehaven was hunkered in. The promised ice storm had begun to move in, turning the air into a wet, freezing shroud. But for Danielle Hoyle, the weather was secondary to the mission of the night. She was behind the wheel of her white Chevy Cruze, moving toward a meeting she believed would change the trajectory of her daughter's life. So we have to look closely at the lure here. Forensic analysis of Danielle's phone would later show a series of communications that acted as a digital trail leading her to the intersection of Road and Sedgwick Street. This wasn't a random location. This is a stretch of road that sits on the edge of residential comfort and industrial isolation. Brandon chose a spot where the street lights are sparse and the tragic, especially on a freezing Tuesday night, is almost non existent. He didn't a- just, excuse Christ, he didn't just ask her to meet. He drew her to a place where her fortress was most vulnerable. Investigators would later uncover that the communication that night was tactical. Brandon reportedly used the guise of buying supplies or meeting the baby to ensure that Danielle would arrive. This is a common tactic used in domestic homicides, using the victim's hope and the child's needs as a tether to pull them into a kill zone. Danielle wasn't just driving to a location, she was driving into a meticulously prepared vacuum of safety. We have to consider the GPS and cell tower pings that were recorded in real time. Brandon wasn't just waiting. His digital footprint showed him positioning himself, loitering in the area of the crime scene before Danielle ever arrived. This was an ambush in every sense of the word. The digital flatline is perhaps the most telling piece of evidence from this window. Up until her arrival at the intersection, Danielle's phone was a hub of activity. But the moment she reached the designated meeting spot, all outgoing communications ceased instantly. There were no "where are you" texts, no final check-ins. The silence on her end was immediate and permanent, marking the exact second the ambush began. Digital forensic extractions would later reveal the depth of this calculation, showing Brandon's premeditated digital scouting for quiet areas and river geographics in the days leading up to the crime. The psychology of the location is also key. Levi Road is familiar territory for a Whitehaven native, but at 11 p.m. in the biting cold, it becomes a place of profound isolation. By choosing this spot, Brandon ensured that any sound would likely be muffled by the wind or ignored by residents who had already retreated from the storm. There's a chilling silence to a Memphis ice storm. The freezing rain creates a sound dampening layer over the neighborhood. Neighbors reported hearing nothing but the storm, which acted as Brandon's unwitting accomplice, swallowing the echoes of the violence. At approximately 11 p.m., a Memphis Police Department officer was en route patrol when he spotted a vehicle that looked out of place. This was Danielle Cruze, sitting awkwardly near the shoulder. The car wasn't parked neatly, it was positioned the wrong way on the left side of the street, skewed as if it had come to a sudden, jarring halt. As the officer stepped out of his patrol car, the sensory details of the scene began to hit him. The first thing he likely heard was the idling engine. The car was still running, the exhaust plumbing white in the freezing air. There's a specific forensic detail there, and that is the thermal signature. The hood of the car was still likely radiating heat, and the interior was still warm from the heater. This told the officer that he hadn't missed the perpetrator by hours, but only minutes. The ghost of Danielle was still present in the warmth of the cabin. The mechanical state of the vehicle provided a chilling insight because the car was found in park. This suggests that Danielle had intentionally stopped and secured the vehicle, acting in total trust. Investigators later performed what's called a fuel idle diagnostics. By measuring the remaining fuel against the car's distance to empty and average consumption while it's idling, they could estimate that the car had been sitting in that spot for less than 30 minutes. This narrowed the window of the crime to a terrifyingly small margin, proving just how narrowly the killer had slipped away. But as the officer got closer, he saw the diamonds on the asphalt. The driver's side window had been completely blown out. In the world of forensics, tempered glass doesn't just break, it explodes into thousands of tiny uniform cubes. These diamonds were everywhere, on the pavement, in the folds of the upholstery, and scattered across the empty car seat. The physics of the glass confirmed the nature of the attack. So when tempered glass is shot, the cone of the break indicates the direction of force. The glass was blown into the car, proving that the shooter stood outside and only inches from the window. The surgical nature of the entry was immediate. While a random carjacking often involves multiple broken windows, here, the driver's side window was the only point of destruction. Danielle was trapped by her own seatbelt and steering wheel, a stationary target in a point blank ambush. The void inside the car was absolute. The driver's seat was empty, the door slightly open, but it was the back seat that turned this from a suspicious vehicle call into a nightmare. The pink accented car seat, the one Danielle had spent hours picking out, the one the hospital staff had meticulously checked just hours prior, was missing, and with it, Kennedy. A critical forensic detail emerged from that car seat. It had been unbuckled and was still intact when it was removed from the car. This proved that Kennedy wasn't forcefully snatched in a way that damaged the restraint system. The the perpetrator took the time to and operate the mechanism properly despite the blitz nature of the shooting. The officer's body cam footage, later played in court, captured the harrowing moment the perimeter of the crime scene was expanded. Just feet away from the idling car in a dark ditch, they found Danielle. She had been shot 5 times.
Oh my goodness.
Forensic experts would later point to an abrasion on her hip consistent with her body being dragged into that ditch. A final cold act to hide the evidence while Brandon fled with the baby. The positioning in the ditch was stark. She hadn't been carefully hidden, but discarded in haste. Notably, there was a lack of defense wounds on Danielle's hands and arms. She never had a chance to put up a fight. She had been executed before she could even process the threat in front of her. The weather created a unique forensic obstacle as well: the atmospheric DNA of the ice storm. Because the ground had been covered in a frozen glaze, there were no footprints. The ice acted as a shield, making it nearly impossible for canine units to track the killer's path on foot. The investigation was forced to rely almost entirely on the digital and ballistic trail, which it didn't take them long to find. On the ground near the driver's side door, investigators found multiple shell casings. These small pieces of brass with a physical link to the violence. They matched the caliber of a Glock 9 mm, the very weapon Brandon would later be linked to. This was the ballistic fingerprint. We must also consider the acoustic reality of the event. The 5 shots weren't a slow exchange. They were a rapid, deliberate succession. While the shells were present, the weapon was absent. Police were already beginning to sweep nearby storm drains and dumpsters, knowing the killer would want to discard the heavy steel evidence as quickly as he discarded the brass. Inside the car, the scene remained a time capsule of Danielle's day. A diaper bag with the name Kennedy on it sat on the back seat, neatly packed. There was a coming home outfit sitting in the front seat. On the passenger seat sat the hospital discharge paperwork. It was dated just 24 hours prior. The official permission for Danielle to start her life as a mother, now sit now, now sitting in a car that had become a tomb. There was also transfer evidence. When the killer leaned into the car to reach Kennedy, he had left behind microscopic clues: grit from the road, fibers from a jacket, and mud from the slick shoulder. And then there was Danielle's phone. Found inside the vehicle, it held the digital echoes of the night. As the Amber Alert was pushed to every device in the city, Danielle's own phone, sitting inside that car, was most likely vibrating with the piercing alert of her own missing child. But even more gut wrenching were the unanswered calls. April Campbell, Danielle's mother, was calling repeatedly. The phone would light up with mom again and again, the vibration echoing against the plastic of the dashboard while Danielle lay in the ditch just feet away. While the blue lights were still strobing on Levi Road, the investigation was already moving at lightning speed. Within the first hour, Danielle's family provided the name that would change everything: Brandon Isabelle. Using the Real-Time Crime Center, also known as RTCC, Memphis police didn't have to guess. They pulled skycop footage from the surrounding intersections. They weren't looking for a ghost. They were looking for a white sedan with specific body damage. By 2 a.m., while the ice was still forming on the windshields of Whitehaven, investigators had tracked that sedan's digital and visual footprint from the crime scene to a Walmart dumpster and finally to the Wolf River. They didn't just find him, they boxed him in with his own movements. The investigation didn't stay cold for long. Danielle's family, like I said, immediately named Brandon as the person that she was going to meet. Investigators could see his white sedan marked by unique physical identifiers, so the body damage to the car, moving from the residential track for the industrial desolation of the Wolf River boat ramp at Island 40 Road. And the timing was mechanical. The drive was a straight line of intent toward a location where he believed the murky, fast moving February current would hide his final secret. While the police were cordoning off Levi Road and the family was searching the woods in the freezing rain, Brandon Isabelle was reportedly finishing off his 25th birthday celebration. He was seen at a Walgreens appearing calm and physically clean, where he purchased a Hallmark card, a 6-pack of Sprite, and trolley gummies, reportedly gifts for another girlfriend. This indicates a period of personal sanitization. He had likely changed his clothes or performed a rudimentary cleanup in the dark in order to maintain that birthday facade. During this entire window, his phone was likely active, getting those normal happy birthday calls, messages, and notifications. This creates a terrifying digital split screen, a screen full of birthday wishes while he stood over a dumpster containing his child's belongings. And the most devastating footage came from a Walmart on Elvis Presley Boulevard. Cameras captured a white sedan driving to the back of the business, stopping at the dumpster. The driver got out and discarded several items. When police later searched that dumpster, they recovered Kennedy's car seat, a pacifier, a tiny mitten, and a blanket. This was the debris of a 2-day life tossed away like trash. When police eventually seized Brandon's car, they found the invisible proof of this journey. Embedded in the floor mats and on the suspect's shoes were microscopic glass fragments, those same diamonds on the asphalt from Levi Road. It was the one thing that he could not vacuum away. And as the sun began to rise on February 2nd, the first light discovery revealed the true scale of this tragedy. The blue police lights reflected off the frozen glaze of the ice storm as investigators in high visibility vests combed the gray, frozen woods of Whitehaven. The morning light didn't bring hope. It only illuminated the roadmap of digital and physical evidence. Brandon Isabelle woke up on February 2nd as a 25-year-old man with a clean slate, while Danielle lay in the cold and Kennedy was lost to the current. But the GPS data, the blood on his own shoes, and the glass in his carpet were forming a roadmap that would lead investigators straight to 201 Poplar. As the sun rose that day, the quiet industrial edge of Mud Island became the epicenter of one of the most intensive and emotionally draining search operations in Tennessee history. The transition from the crime scene at Levi Road to the water's edge was fueled by a haunting realization. The hospital discharge paperwork found on the passenger seat was now the lead investigator's most urgent ticking clock. Next to it laid that homecoming outfit, tiny and soft, a devastating contrast to the diamonds on the asphalt. The mobilization here was massive. The TBI, which is the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and the Shelby County Sheriff's Office converged on the island 40 Road boat ramp. Investigators knew they were fighting a digital flatline. The fuel idle diagnostics of Danielle's car, which had been found still running at 11 p.m. the night before, like I said, suggested that the killer had a head start of less than 30 minutes. Perhaps most haunting of all was the Amber Alert paradox. As the search teams hit the water, the alerts were screaming on every phone in the city, including Danielle's. Each of them were vibrating and going off for a child who was already miles away in the dark. While the search teams were mobilizing, the digital net was revealing a terrifying split screen reality. Investigators didn't just look at where Brandon went. They analyzed his dwell time and cellular triangulation. Because radio waves travel and refract differently over open water, investigators were able to map the specific arc of his phone pings. This proved that he wasn't just in the vicinity. His device was stationary at the very edge of the boat ramp for a duration of the dwell time. This was reinforced by palynology and mineralogical slit analysis. The slit at the Island 40 ramp was a specific mineral fingerprint due to the Wolf River confluence. Yeah, confluence. By matching the mud on Brandon's floorboard to this specific geological profile, they placed his car at the water's edge with scientific certainty. Like, it's just amazing how far all of this stuff has come. Like, if you, like, look at this one versus, the ones we've done before, they can look at the mud and know exactly.
Where you were?
It's insane. Like, I know obviously technology advances and change things happen, but just to know that it's changed to that much, it's just insane. Anyway, so to understand why this search was so agonizingly difficult, you have to understand the physics of the Mississippi River in midwinter. This isn't just a body of water. It is a massive hydraulic machine. At this specific stretch near the mouth of Wolf River, the water undergoes a process called helic flow, where the current doesn't just move forward, but corkscrews downward, pulling objects into deep, dark pockets of the riverbed. So almost like a hurricane, kind of. The river here is a labyrinth of 100-foot deep channels and high velocity undercurrents that move with enough force to shift massive settlement deposits, so sandbars. And these get up to the size of an entire city block in
Oh, they
just,
can get huge.
yep, and this happens in just hours. Like, that's how much these corkscrews work and how fast and strong they are. So there's a specific phenomenon researchers had to contend with known as the hydraulic jump. This is where the swifter, shallower Wolf River meets that deep, slow moving mass of the Mississippi. The turbulence here creates a washing machine effect. For a surge team, this means an object dropped in one spot doesn't just drift, it could tumble, it can be trapped in the recirculating current, or driven deep into the riprap, or the jagged underwater rock used to prevent bank erosion. So basically, anything dropped in this spot can be anywhere. So this was further complicated by the barge displacement. As massive towboats passed through the grid, they displaced millions of gallons of water, creating violent suction and surges that could shift a search object by hundreds of yards in just a matter of seconds. Investigators utilized computerized drift modeling to narrow their field. The TBI specialists used software that accounted for the CFS, which is cubic feet per second, and that's which is cubic feet per second flow of the river, and the river stage gauge height, which was fluctuating during that week because of the weather. They even calculated the terminal velocity and entry angle of the point of impact. This, if an object is dropped at a specific angle into a current, which is moving 5 to 7 miles an hour, the splash down arc can determine whether it stays on the surface for seconds or if it's pulled under instantly. So that's what this calculation they did tells them. So are they looking for something on top of the water or something that's been pulled instantly down? So the water is thick with silt. The NTUs, so the turbidity units, are so high that even high-powered flashlights only penetrate 2 to 3 inches. So divers refer to this as the braille diving. So they go into it, but they don't have a fucking clue what is in front of them. They have to use their hands to be able to tell what it is. Now, on February 2nd, the water temperature here was hovering just above freezing. Divers were weighed down with over 100 pounds of gear. They were tethered to the surface by umbilicals, providing air and high stress acoustic comm links. Through the surface speakers, the team could hear the divers' heavy, labored breathing and the rhythmic clink of tools rubbing against rusted iron. They weren't looking for evidence with their eyes. They were feeling through the freezing mud and pitch black water, fighting a current that threatened to snap their tethers. This forest was clustered with a century's worth of industrial waste. Divers were navigating a lethal debris field of ghost nets, sunken appliances, and widowmakers, which are massive submerged trees. They had to reach their arms into these dark log jam cavities, voids where the current stops but the danger increases, not knowing if they were touching a submerged branch or a piece of evidence. At 100 feet deep, Boyle's law becomes a factor. The crushing pressure, which is roughly 4 times that of the surface, affects the buoyancy of any gases trapped in fabric or remains, keeping them pinned to the floor. A side scan sonar was used extensively, but the turbulence created acoustic shadows. So these are blind spots where the sonar pings were swallowed by the sound around it. So there were some places that even their radars couldn't see. They had to put their hands in these hollowed out logs and things like that, knowing that the pressure of the water could potentially crush it and crush them. There's a tragic technicality why the search for Kennedy became a recovery mission. Forensic experts pointed to the buoyancy and drag created by the river's hydraulics. Because Brandon had discarded the car seat at a Walmart dumpster, Kennedy was left without any structural protection to anchor her. The searchers also had to fight the thermocline. So at this point, they're not hopeful that they're gonna find Kennedy alive.
No.
They're just searching to bring her home. So the searchers here also had to fight the thermocline. In deep water, temperatures drop significantly, acting like a preservative and an anchor simultaneously. To combat this, the first 48 hours included extensive aerial sweeps using flyer, no, using FLIR or forward-looking infrared. Even in the cold, thermal cameras scan for the ghostly green glow of any heat signatures that differs from the surrounding mud. Searchers monitored the Mississippi Flyway for scavenger behavior, or periodically initiating a silent search protocol. During these moments, everyone on the bank would go completely still and silent, allowing the handlers to listen for the waterborne scenting dogs or the sonar equipment pings without interference. Throughout the long nights, the colored LED lights of Fernando D. Soto M. Bridge cast a rhythmic neon glow over the water, a silent witness to the dark work below. The mobilization included cadaver dogs pawing at the surface and whining towards specific eddies. While these alerts provided hope, the Mississippi is a bottom heavy river. Geologists noted that the sediment timeline is so aggressive that an object could be buried under inches of new sediment in just one single night. Despite the deployment of ROVs, which are underwater drones, the river was unyielding. The searchers worked in shifts, their faces raw from the wind, fueled by the desperate hope of April Campbell and the family waiting on the muddy banks. On the shoreline, a shrine of hope began to form. Stuffed animals, candles, and handwritten prayers left by a city that refused to look away. But the only physical fragment ever recovered from the water was found snagged on a jagged branch near the shoreline, and that was a small baby hat. Forensics noted the Siltwick effect. So the way so this is the way that the Mississippi's unique sediment had been deeply embedded itself into the fibers of that tiny hat, proving that it had been subjected to the river's high pressure flow rather than simply just being dropped on the bank. For the family, that hat became a haunting symbol. It was the only thing the river couldn't swallow, a final fragile piece of a life that had only lasted 45 hours. As the days passed and the active grid was exhausted, the search underwent a profound state of transition. On February 10th, the TBI and FBI tactical teams officially moved the case from an active search to a recovery operation. This marks the moment the heavy machinery leaves and the mission was officially handed over to Memphis Harbor Patrol. An official notice to mariners was broadcast to every barge captain and tug operator from Memphis down to the Gulf of Mexico. Beyond that physical search, there was the acoustic environment. The sound of the river in winter is a low, constant roar, a white noise that drowned out the silence and the machinery. It served as a reminder of the scale of the task. The search teams weren't just fighting time, they were fighting a force of nature that had been burying secrets for centuries. Now, by the time the active search was scaled back, the river chapter had become a permanent part of the Memphis narrative, a story of a city looking for a child it had never quite reached. It could never quite reach. Now, Brandon didn't lead police on a high speed chase. He was picked up with a chilling lack of fanfare. When officers moved in to bring him to 201 Poplar, he was calm and almost detached. He was still wearing the same clothes from a birthday celebration. As they handcuffed him, he wasn't a man in mourning. He was a man who seemed to believe that he had successfully reset his life. He walked into that interrogation room thinking that he was smarter than the system. He had no idea the diamonds from Danielle's window were already clinging to his shoes, waiting to testify against him. While the search teams fought the currents of the Mississippi, a different kind of pressure was mounting inside those walls of 201 Poplar, which is the Memphis Police Department's headquarters. Brandon Isabelle was no longer a person of interest. He was the epicenter of a forensic storm. The interrogation was a slow motion collision between a calculated lie and an undeniable digital trail. conducted within the high stakes environment of what they call the box. This psychological setting is designed to shrink a suspect's world until the truth becomes the only viable exit. Investigators from the TBI and MPD Homicide Bureau began the baseline analysis, in which they engaged Brandon in trivial conversation about his 25th birthday to establish his normal speech pattern and heart rate before shifting to the homicide. They utilized the Reed technique here, specifically focusing on the theme development. They offered Brandon various moral excuses, minimizing the intent to see if he would grab onto a lesser version of the truth to save himself. They didn't lead with the river. They began by dismantling his double life timeline, confronting him with the staggering contrast between the cold, mechanical efficiency of a killer and the mundane actions of a man celebrating his birthday. The first cracks appeared during a pre arrest consistency check. Detectives compared his current answers to the brief recorded statement that he had gave uniformed officers at the initial scene. They highlighted his linguistic drift or how he changed the sequence of his errands 3 times, proving his memory was not based on real lived events, but on a script that he was writing in real time. Detectives then presented the Walgreens surveillance footage from later that night, a centerpiece of what they termed the sanitization gap. In this video, Brandon appeared eerily composed, his clothes clean, his hair neat, and that as he purchased that Hallmark card, the 6 pack of Sprite, and those trolley gummies for one of his other many girlfriends. Detectives analyzed the contents of that Hallmark card. A message he wrote was completely incongruent with the timeline of a man whose child was missing, displaying an emotional flatness that suggested he had already moved on to maintaining his secondary romantic facade. Forensic data from his phone deepened this picture of psychological compartmentalization. Social media engagement metrics showed him actively liking and viewing photos on Instagram during the window of time Danielle was missing, but before he arrived at Walgreens operating with chilling normalcy. Investigators knew that in the narrow window between the time Danielle's window was shattered and his arrival at Walgreens, Brendan had undergone a total physical transformation. They pressed him on this missing hour, the exact window where cellular triangulation and granular sector hit data placed his phone. This data showed exactly which side of the cell tower his phone had connected to, proving he didn't just drive past Island 40 Road exit. He turned off the highway and headed directly toward the water. As he sat in the interrogation room, the detectives introduced the invisible proof. They revealed that they had seized his vehicle and discovered those diamonds from the asphalt, those microscopic shards of tempered glass from Danielle's Chevy Cruze embedded deep into his car floor mats. Brandon had maintained that he hadn't been near her car, but the mineralogical evidence proved that he had stepped through the wreckage and carried it with him to the water's edge. This was compounded by the biological transfer pattern analysis. Detectives pointed out specific stains on Brandon's own footwear, which were minuscule traces of biological material that proved he had physically entered the struggle space inside Danielle's vehicle. The pressure peaked when investigators confronted him with photos of hair extensions torn from Danielle's head during the struggle. Brandon simply nodded in silence, a nonverbal admission of the violent physical encounter he had previously denied. To solidify the timeline, they used a time motion study based on the physical receipt found in his pocket. By matching the timestamp to the purchase of the GPS coordinates of the river, they proved he would have had to drive at speeds exceeding 80 miles an hour to make the journey, a calculation that shredded his casual driving alibi. Furthermore, forensic light sources revealed gunshot residue, better known as GSR, on Brandon's pants. Detectives noted that he had attempted a partial sanitization by changing his jacket and hiding it in a closet, but he had failed to change his lower clothing, leaving the chemical signature of the shooting still on him. The pressure intensified when investigators brought in the luminol and phenolphthaleate results. Even though the car looked clean to the naked eye, chemical enhancement revealed a high velocity impact pattern of Danielle's blood on the interior door panel and the edges of the car seat. This shattered Brandon's claim of a peaceful encounter. Now, to test his resolve, detectives utilized tactical silence, stopping the questioning entirely for several minutes, forcing Brandon to sit in the heavy, quiet air of the room. It was during these periods of post Miranda silence that Brandon's nonverbal leakage became a liability. Detectives noted a rhythmic leg bounce and hand wringing that occurred only when the specific depth of the river was mentioned. This inconsistent perspiration yeah, remained a constant. Despite the room being cold, he began to visibly sweat only when the topic shifted towards the water. They then
Bastard.
oh, go ahead.
I just said bastard.
Yep. Mhm. But they knew he was lying. They knew he was full of shit. Detectives then introduced the vehicle's Bluetooth sync logs. The data showed that his phone shook hands with the car's infotainment system at the exact moments he claimed to be away from the vehicle, proving he never left his phone behind to create a false alibi. Furthermore, the vehicle's event data recorder atmospheric sensor provided a chilling log of cabin pressure changes. It recorded the exact second the car door was open and closed at the riverbank, perfectly aligning with the digital flatline of the GPS. The key fob proximity data also confirmed this, showing the key remained within a 3-foot radius of the vehicle throughout that stop. So even the vehicle proximity lighting logs betrayed him, showing the puddle lights were triggered at the boat ramp, proving he had exited the vehicle into the darkness and then returned to the car. These digital signatures showed bursts of high speed, followed by the heavy, silent dwell time at the riverbank, a signature of panic followed by cold calculation. To break his psychological shield, investigators utilized evidence layering, slowly sliding a photo of Kennedy's coming home outfit found in Danielle's car onto the table in front of him. This served as a sensory trigger, a silent accusation that forced Brandon to look at the life he was denying existed. After this, he briefly attempted a third party blame deflection, suggesting Danielle had enemies or that a carjacking occurred, but investigators crossed this by showing there was no stranger DNA in the vehicle. Only a double linked DNA profile on the discarded car seat that matched both the infant and Brandon himself, proving he had been the one to physically handle the seat they found at the Walmart dumpster. The atmospheric tension shifted further when they introduced that Walmart surveillance. They watched Brandon's reaction as they played the video of him at the Elvis Presley Boulevard location, where he was seen discarding a pink accented car seat, pacifier, tiny mitten, and a blanket. This was the moment the good cop, bad cop dynamic was abandoned for a direct moral confrontation. Investigators utilized forensic mirroring, mimicking Brandon's own calm demeanor back to him. Brandon's body language began to fracture into the behavioral cluster of guilt. That included heavy swallowing, rapid blinking, and a sudden slumping of the shoulders. Investigators increased the cognitive load by asking him to explain the 48-hour life of his daughter. Detectives then utilized linguistic analysis, noting the exact moment Brandon's speech shifted from the present tense to the past tense when referring to Kennedy. They also noted his use of third person distancing, where he stopped using Kennedy's name and began to refer to her refer to her as the baby or the situation. They employed chronological inversion, where they asked him to tell his story backwards from the Walgreens visit to the morning of February 1st. That's not always easy to do because you have to think backwards.
Right.
However, if you're telling the truth,
It should be easy.
you may have to think about it a little bit, but it should still line up with how you tell the story the other way around,
Right.
and that is why they do that. So when he reached a stalemate, investigators moved into a spatial reenactment where they placed a map of the Island 40 boat ramp alongside a sonar survey grid in front of him. Now, Brandon initially denied even knowing where the boat ramp was. But in a slip of contaminated knowledge, he began to describe the specific mud and the steep incline of the ramp before he was ever even shown a photo of the terrain.
You just hung yourself.
Right. You've never been there, but you know what it looks like. Okay. This proved that he had physical memory of a place that, again, he had claimed to never have visited. Yeah. So the device unlock logs provided the final digital anchor. These showed that Brandon was actively and biometrically unlocking his phone while his vehicle was stationary at the ramp, which completely negated any claim that he had that he was unaware of his surroundings or that he was simply there in his car asleep. You can't be on your phone and asleep at the same time.
I don't know, I think some of these teenagers do it.
In a chilling attempt to minimize his actions, Brandon offered a 70-30 probability statement where he suggested there was a 70% chance that the child, quote unquote, slid into the water after he placed her on the ground.
Oh, bullshit.
Yeah. Detectives rejected this mathematical distancing using ego clarity and emotional proxying to represent the family's grief. They challenged his self image by asking him to look them in the eye and repeat his lies as if he were talking to the grandmother of the child, telling him that, quote, a good man would give the family a place to grieve. As he began to trace the path on the map, the cognitive interview gap in his story became impossible to bridge. Detectives countered his attempts at redirection by pointing out his Miranda waiver. He had voluntarily agreed to speak, and now his own recorded words were contradicting the physical evidence.
Coming back to bite him in the butt.
Pretty much. Yep. Under the weight of the acoustic and digital evidence, the "I don't know" dissolved into a confession. Brandon admitted to taking the child to the boat ramp and throwing her into the water, providing the specific details of the force and distance of the throw that matched the computerized drift models. In a final admission of motive that solidified the legal element of intent, he confessed he did it because, quote, he did not want to be a single parent.
But he was the technically.
Yeah, I don't understand his logic. Viewing the child as a burden, he was now ready for moving the trajectory of the case toward first degree murder. He confirmed the location that would eventually lead searchers to the small baby hat snag on the branch. This admission was reinforced by digital footprint and guilty knowledge acts, which are found when investigators recovered a trail of social media messages, search history from the days leading up to the tragedy, and his post disposal searches for news reports on Amber Alerts in Memphis while he was still at the Walgreens. The interrogation concluded not with a moment of remorse, but with the total forensic collapse of a man who believed he could outsmart a city, only to be trapped by the very technology he used to navigate his double life. Now, the trial of Brandon Isabelle, which reached its harrowing conclusion just last year in late 2025, served as the final forensic reconstruction of a life stolen before it truly began. Prosecutors Eric Christensen and Drew Carpenter transformed the courtroom into a theater of digital and biological precision, ensuring that the jury didn't just hear a story, but witnessed a timeline of undeniable guilt. The prosecution strategy relied on a total immersion approach. They weaved together the clinical findings of the medical examiner with the cold, calculated data recovered from the vehicle and Brandon's own person. They utilized demonstrative evidence that included large scale 3D renderings of the crime scene to show the jury the exact spatial relationship between Brandon's 9mm Glock and the interior of Danielle's car, proving that the trajectory of the bullets required a conscious, deliberate aim that ruled out any possibility of an accidental discharge. The foundation began with the testimony of medical examiner Dr. Collier. The autopsy of Danielle Hoyle was a grim catalog of 5 separate gunshot wounds, primarily concentrated in her head and neck. Ballistic experts identified the weapon as a 9mm Glock 19, and the wound patterns confirmed that Brandon had stood outside the passenger door of the Chevy Cruze, firing through the window into the driver's seat. And perhaps the most damning physical signature was the significant dragging abrasion on Danielle's hip. This was not a wound from the shooting. It was a post-mortem injury that proved Brandon had physically hauled her body from the car to the roadside, treating the mother of his child as a mere obstacle to be cleared from his path. Prosecutors highlighted the force dynamics of this injury, noting that the depth of the skin tearing suggested a callous lack of care that mirrored his psychological state during the disposal of his daughter. Now, as the trial moved into the physical evidence, the prosecution introduced the stained sock and the results of the GSR mapping. Investigator Eric Carlisle presented a single white sock that had been recovered from Brandon's belongings, which had tested positive for Danielle Hoyle's DNA. This biological link was paired with the chemical evidence that, despite Brandon's frantic attempt at cleaning, showed under forensic light sources of gunshot residue embedded in the fibers of his sweatpants. He had attempted to hide the killer, but he had failed to change his clothes, leaving that chemical signature of the murder on his skin. To further demonstrate his efforts to erase the crime, prosecutors revealed the Walgreens trash recovery. Investigators had discovered biological matter and discarded cleaning supplies in a trash receptacle near the store, providing physical proof of spoliation of evidence. This proved Brandon didn't just go to the store for snacks. He attempted to scrub his person and get rid of any evidence before meeting yet another girlfriend. Further trace evidence was introduced in the form of soil composition analysis. It's okay. I seen you lean over. This came from Brandon's shoes, and it matched the unique mineral profile of the Island 40 boat ramp, providing a geological fingerprint that placed him at the water's edge at the exact moment that Kennedy disappeared. The prosecution further dismantled the defense's momentary panic theory by introducing atmospheric data logs from the vehicle's computer. These logs showed exactly how long the passenger door had remained open at the crime scene, which was a duration far exceeding a random drive-by and perfectly matching the time required to remove a car seat and discard a body. This was bolstered by acoustic localization reports from nearby private security cameras, which, although they didn't capture video of the shooter, recorded the exact decibel levels and timing of the 5 shots, creating a digital fingerprint of the execution. Prosecutors also presented cellular handover logs, showing Brandon's phone jumping between towers at high speed, proving that he wasn't just wandering the streets in shock, but he was navigating a pre-planned route with military-like focus. They had even utilized thermal imaging reconstruction, and they did this to show how the heat signature of the vehicle's engine at the boat ramp would have stood out against the cold river air, a technical detail that corroborated the GPS dwell time data. A critical turning point in the trial focused on the pre-arrest voluntary statement conflict. Prosecutors highlighted a 15-minute window where Brandon spoke to officers at the initial scene before being Mirandized. During this time, he had made a specific spontaneous utterance about Danielle's phone being lost before any officer had even searched her car. This was presented as absolute guilty knowledge, as only the perpetrator would have known the device was missing from the vehicle. The psychological inner piece of the trial was the recorded interrogation footage. The jury sat in a heavy, expectant silence as they watched Brandon's 70-30 probability statement play out on the monitors. On the tape, his voice remained eerily flat as he suggested There was a 70% chance that Kennedy had simply, quote, slipped into the river after he placed the car seat on the bank. Prosecutors used this moment to illustrate his cognitive distancing, showing the jury a man who was calculating the odds of his own survival while his daughter was lost to the 40-degree current of the Mississippi. This was followed by his final chilling admission that he didn't want to be a single parent, and he viewed the 48-hour-old infant as a burden that he was not ready to carry. The prosecution coupled this with premeditation search logs, showing that he had researched child support laws in Tennessee and how to delete GPS history in the weeks leading up to the birth, proving this was not a crime of passion, but instead a planned liquidation of his responsibilities. Then, to deepen the impact, the state introduced linguistic pattern matching, showing how Brandon's social media messages changed from affectionate to clinical the moment Danielle's pregnancy had reached full term. Then, on October 1st of 2025, after a trial defined by technical density, the jury returned with a unanimous verdict. Brandon Isabelle was found guilty on all counts, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, especially aggravated kidnapping and aggravated child abuse. In his closing argument, the lead prosecutor delivered a line that would echo across Memphis forever. He said, quote, "The defendant tried to use the river to wash away his sins, but he forgot that the digital world never stops recording." To emphasize the severity, the prosecution introduced impact statements from Danielle's mother, April Campbell, whose testimony regarding the hollow silence in their home moved the courtroom to tears. The state also secured special conditions for his incarceration, ensuring that he would remain in maximum security with no possibility of parole.
Good.
This reflected the aggravating circumstances of the victim's age and the betrayal of parental trust. Prosecution prosecutors even detailed the economic impact analysis, showing the lifelong loss of the to the community of 2 generations of women, effectively arguing that Brandon had not just killed 2 people, but that he had, quote, "hollowed out a family's entire future." They had presented psychological profiling reports that identified Brandon's behavior as a rare form of parental filicide, driven by extreme narcissism and a total lack of empathy for the familiar bond. The final gavel in the Isabel trial may have closed a legal chapter, but for the village of Whitehaven and the Hoyle family, the echoes of February 1st are a permanent frequency. Now, to truly understand the wreckage Brandon Isabel left behind, we have to look away from the courtroom and back toward the home Danielle shared with her 10-year-old daughter, Jariah.
I
This,
feel so sorry for that baby.
I know. The stolen childhood of Jariah is perhaps the most quiet yet piercing tragedy of the entire case. At 10 years old, Jariah wasn't just losing a mother. She was losing her protector, her teammate, and the future she had built in her mind with her baby sister. On that freezing night, she was waiting at home for a homecoming that would never happen. Instead, she was met with a catastrophic severing. Jariah had to process not only the absence of her mother, but the knowledge that someone her family knew, someone who should have been a source of life, was instead the source of darkness. We talked about it before, but experts in this case discuss the ambiguous loss that Jariah faces. Because of the fact that Kennedy's body was never fully recovered from the Mississippi, there is a lack of physical finality that complicates the entire grieving process. Jariah's journey represents the shadow victims of domestic homicide. Those are the ones who survive the violence but have to live forever in its wake. This is further compounded by relational betrayal trauma, which shattered her fundamental sense of safety within adult relationships. Now, just a few months ago in November of 2025, the legal system attempted to quantify that loss. Judge Carolyn Addison delivered a sentence that resonated far beyond those courtroom walls. At sentencing, Isabel was informed he would serve 2 consecutive life terms for the murders. along with an additional 45 years for kidnapping and child abuse. The judge went on to note that this 45 years was not a random number. She sentenced him to exactly 22 and a half years for each charge, 1 year for every hour of Kennedy Hoyle's 45-hour life. It was a message to Memphis. Every hour that a child draws breath is sacred, and the law would account for every single one of them in this case.
Amen.
In the end, Isabel's total sentence of 147 years ensures that he will never again step foot in the community that he betrayed. And every he will spend all 147 years in maximum security.
Good.
The legacy of this tragedy extended beyond the walls of the courtroom as well, and instead and into the halls of the Tennessee state legislature. For years, the Hoyle family has fought for a Kennedy's Law to mandate swifter action in infant disappearances. And while that specific namesake bill continues to be their primary mission, the outcry, the outcry from this case helped force a total overhaul of how Tennessee protects victims of domestic terror through other landmark acts. Today, we have what is called a triple threat of protection. These are laws that, had they been in place in 2022, they alone could have rewritten Danielle and Kennedy's story. First, there is the Debbie and Marie Domestic Violence Protection Act. This went into effect in July of 2024. This law allows judges to mandate GPS monitoring for high risk offenders as a condition of bail. It creates a digital fence, one that if Brandon had been flagged, an alert would have been sent to Danielle's phone the moment he moved toward that intersection on Levi Road. Then there's Abrial's law, which was also passed in 2024. This mandates that court personnel be specifically trained to recognize red flags of domestic abuse and coercive control, the exact psychological warfare that Brandon had used in order to isolate Danielle. And finally is the newest shield. This is Savanna's law. Named after Deputy Savanna Puckett, this law officially went live on January 1st, 2026. It created the national nope, it created the nation's first public domestic violence offender registry, and it is maintained by the TBI. It means that the double lives of men like Brandon now have a digital trail, giving every daughter and mother a tool to see if the monsters they fear nope, to see the monsters before they ever get close. Sorry, I don't know what the fuck my brain's trying to do.
Me either.
This triple threat, these laws, stand as the true legal monument to Danielle and Kennedy, ensuring their names forever protect the most vulnerable in Tennessee. The Danielle and Kennedy Memorial Fund, established by April Campbell, continues to serve as a promise of resilience funding for Jariah's future as well. Every December, the family's grief is acknowledged at the Shelby County District Attorney's Season of Remembrance. This is where families gather to place commemorative ornaments on a wreath, communal acts of acoustic healing, where the silence of the river is finally met with a city's collective voice. As Danielle's mother, April had testified, quote, "I only got 1 hour with my granddaughter. My daughter gave him an out, and all he had to do was stay gone." That hour is now a permanent part of that Memphis story. A reminder that while the river is deep, the memory of those we lose is deeper. Now, as we close the file on Danielle and Kennedy Hoyle, we are left with a sobering reality. Brandon Isabelle thought he could use the vast, murky currents of the Mississippi to wash away his responsibilities. He believed that in the dark, between the hospital and the home, there was a space where no one was watching. He was wrong. The digital world never stopped recording. The diamonds on the asphalt never stopped reflecting the truth. And a mother's love never stopped fighting from beyond the grave. This case is a reminder that domestic violence thrives in the vulnerability gaps of our lives. It reminds us that coercive control is a slow poison that often precedes a violent explosion. If you are listening to this and you feel like you are walking on eggshells, if you are being pressured to make choices that aren't yours, or if you are living in a double life created by someone else's lies, please look at the story of Danielle and Kennedy. Their names are now written in the laws of states to protect you. Don't wait for that ice storm. Reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. In Memphis, the rivers keep flowing, but the names of Danielle and Kennedy Hoyle stay anchored on the bank. They are the light in the dark, the signal in the noise, and a permanent reminder that no life is too small to change the world. And that is our tragic coverage of Danielle Hoyle and her 2-day-old daughter, Kennedy.
Evidence and change. And it happens more often than people think it does.
Mhm.
I mean, we've had it in our family with our loved ones, and it's not to that extent,
Right,
thank
right.
God, but it just it's very heartbreaking.
Mhm. I told you this one was.
That was rough.
Yeah. Yeah. The rough one.
Well, we're both mothers,
Right.
you know, something was to happen to one of my grandkids like that, they'd have to put me in a nut farm because I'd go after his
Mhm.
stupid butt,
It's one of those that you just don't know what to say, really, is what it comes down to.
except my heart's broken.
You know how you feel?
My heart's broken for them. The whole family,
Right, of course.
you know?
Especially Jariah,
So, yeah, she didn't even
that's
get to hold her little your baby sister, you know?
10 years old.
Oh, mess that kid up for life. She's gonna have a lot of therapy.
But thankfully, her grandma, um, has that set up for her, so that way
Yeah,
that one's awful. It was rough to get through. Kinda one of
yeah, it was.
those, once you get through it, you don't really know what to say. You know what I mean? That
Yeah.
sounds awful,
Oh,
but
I know what I could say, but I don't know if I'm allowed to.
I think that's enough of that for this one.
Yeah.
Everybody's probably gonna hate us after we drag them down. So, for next week, okay, next week, we're moving from the streets of Memphis to the frozen canyons of Colorado. We'll be looking into the case of a college freshman who walked out of her dorm on a cold February night and never came back.
Whoa.
While officials have closed the book on this one, her family says the story is far from over. So join us as we take 4 weeks to examine a case where the official ruling and the physical evidence tell two very different stories. So our next one is a four-parter. Yep. That one is going to be
Rough.
lots of technical. It's not necessarily like rough. It's not the same level as this one. Um Things just don't add up. There's evidence that don't match the ruling, and it's gonna take 4 weeks to get through it all. So that way I'm not throwing everything at you all at once because there's a lot of explanation, um, there's some legal jargon, some technical things in there, so it's a lot coming at you.
Am I gonna need my dictionary?
Probably. Yep, so that's why it's broke up over 4 episodes. But after that, we're gonna do something a little lighter because the last several ones have been.
Rough.
Yeah. So 4 weeks, Then you're gonna get a light one. It's kinda weird. It's a weird light one, kinda mystery-esque.
History S.
Yep. So that one a lighter one is coming. You just gotta hang in there, alright?
Every week I'm here with you.
So
Till
that's
Mandy gets back, and then I can retire.
I know, I can't wait for her to come back. God,
I miss her
I know.
'cause she's a hoot.
I miss her face.
I know. I miss that face.
Okay, guys, that's all we have for this one. I don't really have any woodiness for this one.
Nope.
Nope. Alright, so good night, guys. We hope you keep listening. Be safe, be kind. Reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline if you need that. And as always, remember to
Watch out for monsters.
and don't kill people. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.